Vincent sat by the window of his bedroom, feeling the warmth of the afternoon sun on his face. It was one of the few things he could still experience the way he used to. Warmth, cold, the texture of his bedsheets, the sound of cars honking 20 floors below. But he couldn't see any of it anymore, and that made everything feel hollow. He was 12 years old, living in one of the most expensive apartments in New York City, and he had never felt more alone in his life. 2 years had passed since the accident. 2 years since that rainy November night when his mother was driving them home from his piano recital. 2 years since the truck ran the red light and changed everything forever. His mother died at the scene. Vincent survived, but he lost his sight. The doctors said it was from the trauma to his head. They used big words that his father tried to explain, but Vincent stopped listening after a while. What did it matter why he couldn't see? The result was the same. His father, Robert, had tried everything to help him. Robert was a real estate developer who had built half the skyscrapers in Manhattan. He was the kind of man who solved problems by throwing money at them until they went away. But Vincent's blindness wasn't that kind of problem, and neither was his grief. First came the specialists. Eye doctors from Switzerland, therapists from California, experts in childhood trauma who spoke in soft voices and asked him how he was feeling. Vincent stopped answering after the third one. He knew how he was feeling: empty, angry, scared, sad. What good did it do to say it out loud over and over again? Then came the tutors. His father hired teachers to come to the apartment every day. Math, science, history, English. They were patient and kind, but Vincent barely participated. He would sit at the table in the study, his fingers tracing the bumps of the Braille books they gave him, but the words never seemed to sink in. His mind was somewhere else, somewhere dark. The apartment itself was like a museum, huge rooms with high ceilings, expensive furniture that Vincent wasn't allowed to touch before the accident, because it was valuable. Now, everything had been rearranged for his safety. Rubber corners on the tables, textured tape on the floor to guide him from room to room. His father had even hired someone to teach him how to navigate with a cane, but Vincent refused to use it most days. What was the point of walking around when there was nowhere he wanted to go? Mrs. Lopez, the housekeeper, was probably the only person Vincent talked to regularly. She had been with the family since he was 5, and she had loved his mother dearly. Sometimes when his father was at work and the tutors had gone home, Mrs. Lopez would sit with him in the kitchen while she prepared dinner. She never asked him difficult questions or tried to force him to do things. She just talked about her day, her grandchildren, the weather, normal things. It made Vincent feel a little less alone, but mostly Vincent spent his days in silence. He would sit in his room or wander around the apartment, his fingers trailing along the walls, counting steps so he wouldn't get lost. He had memorized the layout perfectly: 42 steps from his bedroom to the kitchen, 67 steps from the kitchen to his father's office, 18 steps from the living room to the piano. The piano. Vincent avoided that room. It had been his mother's favorite place in the whole apartment. She wasn't a professional musician or anything, but she loved to play. She had taught Vincent when he was little, showing him simple songs. Twinkle, twinkle, little star. Happy birthday. She would laugh when he made mistakes and clap when he got it right. She always said music was the best way to express feelings you didn't have words for. The piano was still there, sitting in the corner of the living room like a ghost. His father never played it. Vincent didn't think his father even knew how. It just sat there, collecting dust, a reminder of everything they had lost. But one evening in October, something strange happened. Vincent's father was working late again, and Mrs. Lopez had just left for the day. The apartment was quiet except for the hum of the air conditioning and the distant sounds of the city below. Vincent was wandering around, restless and bored, when he found himself in the living room. He didn't mean to go there. His feet just took him that way. He stood in the doorway, knowing the piano was somewhere to his left. He could almost picture it, even though he couldn't see it anymore. Dark wood, ivory keys, the little scratch on the side where he had accidentally hit it with a toy truck when he was 6. Without really thinking about it, Vincent walked forward, his hands outstretched until his fingers touched the smooth, cool surface of the piano. He stood there for a moment, his heart beating faster than usual. He hadn't touched this piano since before the accident, before everything fell apart. Slowly, carefully, he pulled out the bench and sat down. The leather was cold against his legs. He could smell the faint scent of furniture polish. His fingers hovered over the keys, trembling slightly, and then he pressed one key. Just one. The note rang out in the quiet apartment, clear and pure. Middle C, he remembered that much. Vincent pressed another key, then another. He wasn't playing a song, just touching the keys randomly, listening to the sounds they made. High notes, low notes, some that sounded happy, some that sounded sad. He didn't know what he was doing or why he was doing it. He just knew that for the first time in 2 years, something felt different. Something felt almost like it mattered. He didn't hear his father come home, didn't hear the front door open or the briefcase being set down in the hallway. He just kept pressing keys, lost in the sounds, in the memory of his mother's hands guiding his when he was small. Robert stood in the doorway of the living room, barely breathing. He watched his son at the piano, saw the concentration on Vincent's face, the slight tilt of his head as he listened to each note. It wasn't music, not really, but it was something. It was the first time since the accident that Robert had seen his son show interest in anything at all. He wanted to say something, to encourage Vincent, to tell him how proud he was. But he was afraid that if he spoke, if he broke this fragile moment, Vincent would stop, would retreat back into that silent, unreachable place where he had been living for 2 years. So Robert just stood there, watching and listening, as his son touched the piano keys in the growing darkness. And for the first time in a very long time, he felt something that almost resembled hope. The next morning, Robert made phone calls, lots of them. He called the best piano teachers in New York City, the kind of instructors who taught at Juilliard, who had trained concert pianists, who charged $500 an hour. Money wasn't an issue. Robert would pay anything if it meant his son was finally interested in something again. The first teacher arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. Her name was Patricia, and she came with an impressive resume and a leather bag full of Braille sheet music. She was polite and professional, speaking to Vincent in that careful way adults use when they're trying too hard to be understanding. Vincent sat at the piano bench, his hands in his lap, and said nothing. Patricia tried for 45 minutes, asking questions, suggesting simple exercises, even playing a few pieces herself to demonstrate. Vincent just sat there silent and still as a statue. When she finally left, Robert walked her to the door, apologizing, promising his son would do better next time. But there wasn't going to be a next time. Patricia called the following day and politely declined to return. The second teacher lasted 20 minutes. The third one made it through half an hour before giving up. The fourth teacher, a man who specialized in teaching blind students, tried 3 sessions before admitting defeat. "Your son has potential," he told Robert quietly, "but he's not ready. He's still grieving. Maybe give it more time." But Robert didn't want to give it more time. For the first time in 2 years, Vincent had shown interest in something. The piano was the key. Robert was sure of it. He just needed to find the right teacher, someone patient enough, someone who understood. He was running out of options when Mrs. Lopez mentioned something one evening while she was preparing dinner. "There's a man," she said, chopping vegetables at the kitchen counter. "An old man. I've seen him a few times in the building lobby." Robert looked up from his laptop. "What about him?" Mrs. Lopez continued chopping, not meeting his eyes. "Sometimes he plays the piano down there." "You know the piano in the lobby?" the doorman told. "They let him play sometimes when the regular pianist is sick or on break. He's very good." Robert frowned. The building had a small grand piano in the lobby for ambiance. A professional pianist played there during evening hours for the residents, but he'd never heard of anyone else being allowed to play it. Anyway, Mrs. Lopez continued, "Last week, when I took Vincent down for his doctor's appointment, this old man was playing. Vincent stopped. Just stopped right there in the lobby and listened. Really listened. It was the first time I've seen him pay attention to anything like that." Robert set his laptop aside. "Did you talk to him? This man?" "No, but the doorman did. He asked about Vincent. Wanted to know about him. The doorman told him a little bit, about the accident, about Vincent being blind now." Mrs. Lopez paused, then added, "The man seemed sad when he heard it. Really sad, like it hurt him personally." Something about this intrigued Robert. Do you know his name? Thomas. Just Thomas. The doorman said he lives in Queens somewhere. Takes the subway here. He's not wealthy or anything. Just an old man who loves to play piano. Everything about this was wrong. Robert had been hiring credentialed experts with decades of experience. This was just some random old man who played in the lobby. He probably wasn't even a real teacher. But something made Robert curious. Maybe it was desperation. Maybe it was the fact that Vincent had actually stopped to listen. Either way, he told Mrs. Lopez to find out more. It took a few days, but Mrs. Lopez and the doorman managed to catch Thomas one evening. They explained the situation, told him about Vincent, asked if he might be willing to give the boy some piano lessons. Thomas was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something that the doorman later repeated to Robert. "I don't teach for money, and I don't teach the way rich people expect. If the father can accept that, I'll meet the boy." Robert wasn't sure what to make of this, but he agreed. What did he have to lose? Thomas arrived on a Thursday evening just after 6. Robert opened the door and got his first look at the man who might teach his son. He was old, probably in his mid-70s, with white hair and deep lines around his eyes. His clothes were clean but worn, the kind you'd buy at a discount store. His shoes were scuffed. His hands were weathered and marked with age spots. Everything about him screamed ordinary, common, not at all what Robert had in mind. "I'm Thomas," the old man said simply, offering his hand. Robert shook it, feeling the calluses on Thomas's palm. "Robert, thank you for coming. Vincent is in the living room." Thomas followed him into the apartment, and Robert watched the old man's eyes take in the expensive furniture, the artwork on the walls, the floor-to-ceiling windows with their view of Central Park. Thomas's expression didn't change. He didn't seem impressed or intimidated. He just looked around like he was noticing things, filing them away. Vincent was sitting on the couch, his head turned toward the sound of footsteps. He looked tense, defensive. Robert had told him someone new was coming, and Vincent clearly wasn't happy about it. "Vincent," Robert said, "this is Thomas. He's going to—" "I'm not here to teach you," Thomas interrupted, his voice gentle but firm. He walked over to the piano, not to Vincent. "I'm here to play for a bit. You can listen if you want, or not. Either way is fine." Robert started to say something, but Thomas held up a hand, stopping him. Then the old man sat down at the piano bench, stretched his fingers, and began to play. It wasn't anything Robert recognized. Not Mozart or Beethoven or any of the classical pieces the other teachers had tried. It was something slower, simpler, almost like a lullaby. The notes seemed to float through the room, soft and unhurried. Robert watched his son. Vincent's defensive posture slowly relaxed. His head tilted slightly, the way it did when he was really listening to something. His fingers, which had been clenched in his lap, loosened. Thomas played for about 10 minutes. When he finished, he didn't say anything at first. He just sat there, his hands resting on the keys. "Your mother played piano," Thomas said suddenly, not turning around. It wasn't a question. Vincent's voice was barely a whisper. "How did you know?" "The piano told me," Thomas said. "It remembers her hands. Instruments remember things like that." He stood up slowly, like his joints hurt. "I'll come back in a few days if you want. We don't have to do lessons. We can just play around. See what happens." Robert expected Vincent to stay silent the way he had with every other teacher, but his son surprised him. "Okay," Vincent said quietly. Thomas nodded and headed for the door. Robert followed him out into the hallway. "Wait," Robert said. "We didn't discuss payment. I don't want your money," Thomas said, his voice kind but firm. "I told your housekeeper that. If I'm going to work with your son, it's because he needs music, not because you're paying me. I have enough to live on. I don't need more." Robert didn't know what to say to that. Then, "Why are you doing this?" Thomas looked at him with eyes that seemed much older than his face. "Because I know what it's like to lose everything and need music to find your way back. Your son reminds me of someone. That's reason enough." Before Robert could ask what he meant, Thomas walked to the elevator and was gone. Robert stood in the hallway, more confused than ever. But when he went back inside, Vincent was still sitting on the couch, and for the first time in 2 years, there was something different on his son's face. It almost looked like interest, maybe even hope. Thomas came back 3 days later, just like he promised. And then he came again, and again, always on the same days, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, arriving at 6 in the evening and staying for about an hour. But he didn't teach the way any of the other instructors had tried to teach. He never brought sheet music or lesson plans. He never talked about scales or finger positions or proper posture. Most of the time, he just played. He would sit at the piano and fill the apartment with music while Vincent listened from wherever he happened to be sitting. Sometimes Thomas played classical pieces. Other times he played songs Vincent had never heard before, jazz melodies that twisted and turned in unexpected ways, old folk tunes that sounded like they came from another century. Each piece seemed to carry its own feeling, its own story. After a few weeks, Thomas started asking Vincent to sit beside him at the piano bench. Not to play, just to sit, to be close to the music. "Put your hand here," Thomas said one evening, guiding Vincent's palm to rest lightly on top of the piano. "Feel that? The vibration? Every note creates a different feeling. Low notes rumble. High notes tickle. Close your eyes, well, you know what I mean, and just feel it." Vincent did. He felt the piano humming under his hand as Thomas played, felt how different notes created different sensations. It was like the piano was alive, speaking a language he was just beginning to understand. "Music isn't just something you hear," Thomas explained, his weathered fingers moving across the keys. "It's something you feel. In your chest. In your bones." Blind people actually have an advantage here. You're not distracted by looking at the keys or reading sheet music. You can focus on the feeling. Slowly, carefully, Thomas began letting Vincent try. He would play a simple melody, then take Vincent's hands and place them on the right keys, letting him feel which notes came next. It was like learning a new language through touch and sound rather than sight. "Don't think about it too much," Thomas would say. "Music isn't math. It's not about getting it right or wrong. It's about expressing what's inside you." Vincent was hesitant at first. His fingers would shake. He would hit wrong notes and get frustrated. But Thomas never corrected him the way the other teachers had. He never said, "No, that's wrong, do it again." Instead, he would say things like, "Interesting choice. Play it again and see how it makes you feel." Robert would come home from work and hear them in the living room. Not really lessons, more like conversations. Thomas talking about how music was like colors, how each chord had its own shade and temperature. "This chord here," Thomas would say, playing something minor and melancholy. "This is dark blue, like the sky right before a storm. Can you feel that sadness in it? Now try this one." He would shift to a major chord. "This is yellow, bright, happy, like sunshine. You hear the difference?" And somehow Vincent did. He started to understand that music could paint pictures, even for someone who couldn't see. The change in Vincent wasn't immediate. It happened gradually, like spring coming after a long winter. He started talking more, asking questions about the music. About Thomas. About everything. "Why do you come here?" Vincent asked one evening, his fingers resting on the piano keys. "My dad's not paying you. You take the subway for like an hour just to get here. Why?" Thomas was quiet for a moment. "I had a student once. A long time ago. Someone special. I couldn't help them the way I wanted to. I guess I'm trying to make up for that." "What happened to them?" "They're gone now," Thomas said softly. "But music has a way of keeping people alive even after they're gone. When you play, you're creating something that lasts beyond you." Your mother understood that. Vincent's throat tightened. Nobody really talked about his mother anymore. His father couldn't without getting upset. Mrs. Lopez would mention her sometimes, but carefully, like she was afraid Vincent would break. But Thomas spoke about her naturally, like it was okay to remember. "She used to play for me," Vincent said quietly. "Simple songs. She wasn't great at it, but she loved it." "Then she was great at it," Thomas said. "Being great at music isn't about being perfect. It's about loving it enough to do it anyway. That's what makes it real." As weeks turned into months, Vincent's playing improved dramatically. But more than that, he started to come alive again. He would practice between Thomas's visits, working through melodies by ear, creating his own simple compositions. Music became the way he made sense of the world that had gone dark around him. Mrs. Lopez noticed the change too. Vincent smiled more. He talked about things he wanted to try. He even started using his cane properly, wanting to move around the apartment freely so he could get to the piano whenever he wanted. One day, about 4 months after Thomas had started coming, something unexpected happened. Thomas was teaching Vincent a new piece, something melancholy and beautiful. Vincent was struggling with one section, getting frustrated. "I can't get it right," Vincent said, his hands falling away from the keys. "There's no right," Thomas reminded him. "There's only what you feel. Try it again, but this time, think about something that makes you sad. Don't hide from it. Let it into the music." Vincent hesitated. Then his fingers found the keys again. This time, when he played the difficult section, he thought about his mother, about the accident, about everything he had lost. His fingers stumbled, but the emotion was there, raw and real. When he finished, there were tears running down his face. Thomas didn't say anything about the tears. He just put a gentle hand on Vincent's shoulder. "That's it," he said quietly. "That's real music. You just played from your heart, not your head. That's what matters." Vincent wiped his eyes with his sleeve. "Does it ever stop hurting? Missing someone?" "No," Thomas said honestly. "But music helps. It gives the pain somewhere to go. Instead of keeping it locked up inside, you can put it into the notes. Share it with the world. That's how beauty comes from sadness." Robert stood in the doorway watching this exchange. He had never seen anyone reach his son the way this old man did. Thomas wasn't just teaching Vincent piano. He was teaching him how to live again, how to take all that grief and loneliness and transform it into something meaningful. After that session, Vincent's playing changed. It became more emotional, more personal. He started composing his own pieces, simple melodies that captured feelings he couldn't put into words. Thomas encouraged every note, every experiment. "You're not playing other people's music anymore," Thomas observed one evening. "You're creating your own voice. That's when you know someone is becoming a real musician." Vincent was 14 now, and he played piano every single day, sometimes for hours. It was like he was making up for lost time, discovering a part of himself he never knew existed. Thomas still came 3 times a week, still refused any payment, still took the long subway ride from Queens. He and Vincent had developed a bond that went beyond teacher and student. They were more like friends, or maybe family. Thomas understood Vincent's pain in a way that nobody else seemed to. One Friday evening, Robert worked up the courage to ask Thomas something that had been bothering him. "You said you had a student before. Someone special. Can I ask what happened?" Thomas looked out the window at the New York skyline, his expression distant. "I had a daughter once. She played piano. She was 8 years old, and she was better than I could ever hope to be. She died in an accident with her mother. After that, I couldn't play the way I used to. But I learned I could teach. I could help other children find what my daughter found in music. Joy, freedom, a way to express the inexpressible." Robert felt his heart clench. "I'm sorry. I had no idea. It was a long time ago," Thomas said. "But working with Vincent, it feels like I'm honoring her memory, keeping music alive in her place. Does that make sense?" "Yes," Robert said quietly. "It makes perfect sense." 2 years had passed since Thomas first walked into the apartment. Vincent was 16 now, and his playing had reached a level that shocked everyone who heard it. He wasn't just playing songs anymore. He was creating experiences. Every piece he performed felt alive, emotional, like he was telling a story without words. His own compositions were even more remarkable, haunting melodies that seemed to capture sadness and hope at the same time, music that made people stop whatever they were doing and just listen. Robert was proud, more than proud. He had watched his broken, silent son transform into this confident young man who expressed himself through music. And he wanted to share that with the world. One evening, while Vincent was practicing, Robert made a decision. He pulled out his phone and called an old friend who worked in music production. "I need you to hear something," Robert said. And he quietly recorded Vincent playing one of his original compositions. A week later, his phone wouldn't stop ringing. The recording had made its way through the music industry faster than Robert expected. Producers wanted to meet Vincent. Concert halls were offering performance opportunities. A television morning show wanted him as a guest. Everyone was calling him a prodigy, a genius, the next big thing. Robert was thrilled. This was validation. Proof that Thomas's unconventional methods had worked. Proof that his son had real talent. But when he mentioned it to Thomas, the old man's face darkened. "No," Thomas said firmly. They were alone in the kitchen while Vincent practiced in the other room. "He's not ready for that." "Not ready?" Robert couldn't hide his frustration. "Did you hear him play today? He's incredible. The world needs to hear what he can do." "He doesn't play for the world," Thomas said, his voice quiet but intense. "He plays to heal. He plays because it gives him peace. If you put him on a stage now for the wrong reasons, you'll ruin that." "The wrong reasons?" Robert felt his temper rising. "I want people to see what my son can do. I want him to have opportunities." "What's wrong with that?" "Because he'll start playing for applause instead of playing for himself," Thomas explained. "He'll start worrying about what people think instead of expressing what he feels. Music will become a job instead of a sanctuary. I've seen it happen before." But Robert had made up his mind. For 2 years he had followed Thomas's lead, trusted his methods even when they seemed strange. But this was different. This was his son's future. Vincent deserved recognition for his talent. He deserved to be celebrated. "I appreciate everything you've done," Robert said carefully, "but I'm his father. And I think it's time Vincent shared his gift with more than just us." Thomas looked at him for a long moment, sadness in his eyes. "If you do this, you're making a mistake. But he's your son. I can't stop you." Robert arranged everything. A single performance at Carnegie Hall. Not a full concert, just a 1-hour recital. Vincent would play some classical pieces and some of his own compositions. It would be invitation-only, intimate, a way to introduce him to the music world properly. Thomas continued to come for lessons, but something had changed between him and Robert. The easy warmth was gone. Thomas was polite but distant. He focused entirely on Vincent, preparing him as best he could. "Remember," Thomas told Vincent during their practice sessions, "when you get on that stage, don't think about the audience. Don't play for them. Play for your mother. Play for yourself. Play for the music itself. That's the only way it stays true." Vincent nodded, but Robert could tell his son was excited. Nervous, but excited. This would be Vincent's first time performing in public since the accident. His first time showing the world what he could do. The night before the concert, Thomas seemed different. Quieter than usual. Almost sad. He sat with Vincent at the piano, going through the pieces one last time. When they finished, Thomas put his hand on Vincent's shoulder. "I'm proud of you," Thomas said softly. "Not because you're talented. Talent is just a gift you're born with. I'm proud because you took your pain and turned it into something beautiful. That takes courage. That takes heart." "You'll be there tomorrow, right?" Vincent asked. "At the concert?" Thomas hesitated. "I'll be there in spirit. But Vincent, I need you to remember something. Whatever happens tomorrow, whatever comes after, don't lose why you started playing. Music saved you. Don't let success change that." Vincent didn't fully understand what Thomas meant, but he nodded anyway. The next evening, Carnegie Hall glittered with lights and well-dressed people. Robert had invited music critics, industry professionals, wealthy friends. The small concert hall was filled with people eager to see the blind prodigy everyone was talking about. Vincent stood backstage, his fingers nervously tapping against his leg. Mrs. Lopez was with him, holding his arm, offering quiet encouragement. Robert was somewhere in the audience, probably making sure everything was perfect. "You'll do great," Mrs. Lopez whispered. "Thomas taught you well. Is he here?" Vincent asked. "Thomas?" Mrs. Lopez looked around but didn't see the old man anywhere. "I'm sure he's here somewhere." The stage manager came to get Vincent. It was time. Walking out onto that stage was the most terrifying thing Vincent had ever done. He couldn't see the audience, but he could hear them. The rustling of programs, quiet conversations, the scrape of chairs. Hundreds of people, all waiting to judge him. His hands were shaking as he found the piano bench and sat down. For a moment his mind went blank. He couldn't remember what he was supposed to play first. Couldn't remember anything except the fear. Then he heard Thomas's voice in his memory. "Play for your mother. Play for yourself. Play for the music itself." Vincent took a deep breath. He placed his fingers on the keys, and he began to play. The first piece was Chopin, a nocturne his mother had loved. His fingers found the notes easily. muscle memory taking over. But it was more than just hitting the right keys. Vincent poured everything into it. His grief, his loneliness, his journey back to the light. The audience disappeared. The stage disappeared. There was only the music and the feeling behind it. He played for an hour, moving from classical pieces to his own compositions. Each song told a part of his story. The fear after the accident, the isolation, the slow discovery of music as a lifeline, the gratitude for the teacher who had saved him. When he finished his final piece, the silence lasted for several heartbeats. Then the audience erupted in applause. People were standing, clapping, some even crying. Vincent sat at the piano, overwhelmed. He had done it. He had shared his music and people had understood. Backstage, reporters wanted interviews. Music producers wanted to talk about recording contracts. Everyone wanted a piece of him. Robert was beaming, shaking hands, accepting congratulations. But Vincent kept asking, "Where's Thomas? Is he here?" Nobody had seen him. When they finally got home that night, exhausted and exhilarated, Vincent immediately went to the piano. He wanted to tell Thomas about everything, about how it felt, about the standing ovation. But Thomas wasn't there. On top of the piano, there was a folded piece of paper. Vincent's fingers found it immediately. "Dad," he called. "There's something here." Robert picked up the note and read it aloud, his voice catching. "Vincent, you don't need me anymore. You found your voice. You found your strength. Keep playing, but play for the right reasons. Play because it feeds your soul, not because people applaud. Your mother would be proud. I'm proud. Take care of yourself, Thomas." Vincent felt like the floor had disappeared beneath him. He left just like that? Robert looked at the note, feeling guilt twist in his stomach. "I'll find him. I'll call everyone. We'll bring him back." But somehow, both of them knew that Thomas didn't want to be found. Vincent walked to the piano and sat down heavily. His night of triumph suddenly felt empty. All those people cheering, all that success, and the one person whose opinion mattered most wasn't there to share it. He placed his fingers on the keys and began to play. Not for an audience this time, just for himself, and for the teacher who had given him everything and asked for nothing in return. Robert hired private investigators. He called every contact he had. He even went on television during one of Vincent's interviews and made a public appeal for Thomas to come forward. But there was nothing. No phone call, no letter. No sign of the old man who had spent 2 years transforming his son's life. The address in Queens that Thomas had given them. It belonged to a small apartment building, but none of the residents knew anyone named Thomas. The superintendent said an older man had rented a unit there for about 2 years, paid cash every month. But he had moved out the day after Vincent's concert. No forwarding address, nothing. It was like Thomas had been a ghost. There one moment, gone the next. Vincent was heartbroken. He still played piano every day, but something had changed. The joy wasn't quite the same. He kept thinking about Thomas's warning, about playing for the right reasons. Had his father's decision to push for the concert driven Thomas away? Had Vincent somehow failed him? More offers came in after Carnegie Hall. Record labels, concert tours, television appearances. Robert wanted to accept all of them, but Vincent refused most of them. "Thomas said not to lose why I started playing," he told his father. "I need time to figure out what that means." The tension between father and son grew. Robert thought Vincent was throwing away incredible opportunities. Vincent thought his father cared more about fame than about music. They barely spoke for weeks. It was Mrs. Lopez who finally brought them the answer they'd been searching for. She came to Robert's office one evening, her hands shaking as she held an old newspaper clipping. "Mr. Robert," she said quietly, "I found something. I was at my sister's house and she has these old newspapers in her garage. I was helping her clean and I saw this. I think you need to see it." The newspaper was yellowed with age, dated March 1968, almost 50 years old. The headline read, "Piano prodigy Thomas Brennan retires after tragic accident." Robert's hands trembled as he read the article. There was a photograph of a young man, maybe 30 years old, sitting at a piano. He was handsome, confident, smiling at the camera. But Robert recognized something in the eyes, the shape of the face. It was Thomas. A much younger Thomas, but definitely him. The article told a story that made Robert's chest tight. Thomas Brennan had been a child prodigy performing at Carnegie Hall by age 10. By his 20s, he was considered one of the greatest pianists of his generation. He had performed with the world's best orchestras. He had recorded albums that won awards. He was famous, wealthy, at the peak of his career. Then came the accident. A car crash that killed his wife and 8-year-old daughter. Thomas survived, but his right hand was badly damaged. He could still use it for everyday things, but the precision and strength needed for professional piano performance was gone. His career was over. The article mentioned that Thomas had refused all interviews after the accident. He disappeared from public life completely. The last anyone knew, he was teaching piano to underprivileged children somewhere in New York, but he refused to use his famous name or accept recognition for his work. Robert sat down heavily, the newspaper still in his hands. Mrs. Lopez stood nearby, wiping tears from her eyes. "He was famous," Robert whispered. "He was one of the greatest, and we never knew." "He didn't want us to know," Mrs. Lopez said softly. "He just wanted to help Vincent." Robert immediately showed Vincent the article. He sat beside his son on the couch and read every word aloud, his voice breaking in places. When he finished, Vincent was crying. Not sad tears exactly, but something deeper, a mixture of grief and gratitude and understanding. "He knew," Vincent said, his voice thick with emotion. "He knew exactly what I was going through. He lost everything too. His career, his family, everything. And instead of giving up, he spent his life helping kids like me." Robert put his arm around his son. "I'm sorry," he said. "I'm sorry I pushed for that concert. I'm sorry I didn't listen to him. He was trying to protect you, and I thought I knew better." Vincent leaned against his father. "He wasn't just teaching me piano, Dad. He was teaching me how to survive losing everything, how to take pain and turn it into something beautiful. That's what he did with his own life." They sat there together for a long time, both of them understanding finally what Thomas had really given them. It wasn't just piano lessons. It was a roadmap for healing. Robert tried a few more times to find Thomas, but eventually accepted that the old man didn't want to be found. Thomas had completed what he came to do. Vincent didn't need him anymore. At least that's what Thomas believed. Years passed. Vincent continued to play, but he was careful about it. He performed occasionally, but only when it felt right. Only when he had something real to express. He refused to become a performing machine, churning out concerts for money and applause. Instead, when Vincent turned 21, he did something that surprised everyone. He used money from his trust fund to start a foundation. He called it the Brennan Foundation, named after the teacher who had saved his life. The foundation's mission was simple. It provided free music education to children who had experienced trauma. Kids who had lost parents. Kids who had been in accidents. Kids who were struggling with grief and pain and didn't know how to express it. Vincent taught some of the classes himself. He would sit at the piano with these broken children and show them what Thomas had shown him, that music could be a lifeline, that pain could be transformed into beauty, that you didn't have to be perfect to be great at music, you just had to be honest. The foundation grew. Within 5 years, there were branches in 4 cities. Hundreds of children were learning that music could heal. Every single teacher in the program was instructed to teach the way Thomas taught. With patience, with understanding, with the knowledge that music wasn't about performance, it was about survival. Vincent kept that old newspaper article framed on his wall next to Thomas's goodbye note. Sometimes when he was teaching a particularly difficult student, someone who reminded him of his younger self, he would look at those 2 pieces of paper and remember. He never saw Thomas again, never got another letter or phone call, but he understood why. Thomas had never wanted recognition or gratitude. He had wanted to pass on what he had learned in his own suffering. That was the gift, not the piano lessons, but the understanding that we heal by helping others heal. Vincent still performed sometimes. Small concerts, intimate venues, but most of his time was spent teaching, sitting with traumatized children, showing them how to take their pain and turn it into music, watching them transform the way he had transformed. One evening, when Vincent was 30 years old, he was teaching at the foundation's main location in Manhattan. A young girl, maybe 9 years old, was struggling with a piece. She had lost her father in an accident and hadn't spoken much since. Vincent sat beside her at the piano. "Don't think about the notes," he said gently. "Think about your dad. Think about something you miss about him. Let that feeling guide your fingers. The girl tried again, and this time something shifted. The music became real, emotional. When she finished, there were tears on her cheeks, but she was smiling too. "That's it," Vincent said softly. "That's what music is for. To help us say the things we can't put into words." In that moment, Vincent felt Thomas's presence so strongly, it was almost like the old man was standing beside him. He could almost hear Thomas's voice saying, "You're doing good work, Vincent. Keep going," and Vincent did. Every day with every student, he carried on Thomas's legacy, not by becoming famous or wealthy or celebrated, but by doing exactly what Thomas had done for him, taking broken people and showing them how to heal through music, one note at a time. The newspaper article on his wall had yellowed even more with time, but Vincent kept it there as a reminder. Thomas Brennan had been a legend who gave up his name and recognition to help others find their way out of darkness. And now Vincent was doing the same. That was the real gift Thomas had given him. Not just the ability to play piano, but the understanding that the greatest thing we can do with our talents is use them to lift others up. And somewhere out there, Vincent hoped, Thomas knew that his lessons had taken root, that they were spreading, that his legacy would live on in every child who found healing through music. Thomas had disappeared, but he had never really left. He lived on in every note Vincent played, in every student he taught, in every life that was transformed by music. And that, Vincent understood, was exactly what Thomas had wanted all along.